Warning to all crypto holders. Bitcoin's going to continue to bounce between these two levels, which is roughly $95,000 and $85,000, until the Clarity Act passes. Now, there's a big problem with the Clarity Act. While some insiders claim it's going to pass, if it does without any amendments that Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, has been asking for, it could be detrimental to a lot of your altcoins in crypto. Because while sure, yes, it will boost liquidity in crypto in terms of Bitcoin and ETFs and adoptions from financial institutions, one of the things the big banks are trying to ban is stablecoin yield, something a lot of these ecosystems rely on for revenue. If you've been watching the World Economic Forum, you would know that Brian Armstrong has been a huge advocate for changes in the Clarity Act. But everyone at Davos is talking about blockchain technology. And Brian Armstrong has been discussing how the banks should not be allowed to ban stablecoin yield. See, regional banks are scared that if we allow Coinbase to offer these yield offerings to retail, they're essentially going to collapse because no one's going to be incentivized to put their money into a bank when they can earn upwards of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% yield on their Coinbase account. Now, on one hand, yes, that's a concern, right? People rely on these pensions and regional banks, et cetera, and that would be devastating to financial markets if there is to be a bank run or a collapse. But it's also just as bad that these banks are trying to control the industry because they don't want to offer us that yield. They want to take your yield and lend it out. Let's say it passes and they somewhat minimize the stablecoin yield opportunity. It will drive out innovation not only from the United States. A lot of these layer projects, these L1s, L2s that rely on DeFi and yield opportunities, they're no longer going to be able to produce that type of revenue. Drying up liquidity and bringing it primarily into the projects that are in bed with the United States government and institutions, or projects that have ETFs. So sure, Bitcoin could go back to 125K and you could see decent liquidity levels start to drive back into the crypto markets if it were to pass. What happens to all the ecosystem plays like Cardano that are reliant on DeFi ecosystems and want users to use the yield opportunity products that exist within their ecosystem? I don't think they're going to go away, but I think it's very hard to argue that liquidity is not going to dry up on those chains, or at least be harder to obtain, which is why I am with Brian Armstrong in terms of making amendments to this Clarity Act. Crypto is not meant to be used by banks to take advantage more and more of retail. It's meant for us to finally get the fair value and store value that we deserve when holding our wealth. Bottom line is, if it passes, I believe Bitcoin is going to break past 97,000. If it continues to delay, I think we're going to track back towards 84,000, potentially retesting this wick that we had towards that $80,000 level. And until we get a new Federal Reserve and liquidity starts entering the markets or tariffs are lifted, we're literally going to be relying off the decisions of this regulation and Donald Trump tweets before we see any type of trend reversal. So my warning to you, if you're in crypto, is yeah, sure, we could have a dead cat bounce upwards to $106,000 and maybe up to $100,000 in the next 4 to 8 weeks. You could see decent growth with